This is my So You Want to Be President presentation. So first we had to pick a candidate, and I picked the war hero, which was candidate Taylor Brooks, and he was 44 years old, born on a U.S. military base in Germany to 2 U.S. citizens, which is important, and a former military officer, and he lives in Texas. So is he eligible to run for president? Yes, he is, because he is 44 years old, and you have to be at least 35. He has been a U.S. citizen for the past 14 years because he lives in Texas currently, and it said he was just born on a base, but it didn't say anything about him staying in Germany. And then this qualifies him as being a citizen at birth, which is the other requirement, because even though his parents were abroad, both were U.S. citizens, so that allows him to be a born citizen. So this is basically what I just described, but he must live in the U.S. for 14 years, must be over 35, must be U.S. citizen, and then it asks to describe the terms, and the term is 4 years, and it can only be held twice by the same person. So these are the day in life scenarios. This is one, and this is the hurricane scenario. And the role that this follows is the chief of state, and this is it follows this role because by being a symbolic leader of the nation and addressing the nation and being the leader of the nation, it shows the chief of state duties, which is basically you being the president of the United States and showing that you are the leader. And then this takes care of the clause. This is this happens through the take care clause because this allows the president to deploy federal forces for relief after natural disasters. So the next one is a cyber attack, and the role for this is a chief diplomat, and the chief diplomat is just making negotiations with other countries and other foreign places. And so as the chief diplomat, the president must be able to negotiate agreements when it comes to military things like the cyber attack, and it creates they can help create the U.S. foreign policy and stand how they want to address foreign policy. And then Article 2, Section 2 is allows for the president to receive other leadership, have meetings with them and then make treaties with them. And obviously it has to go through more than just the president himself, but that section allows them to at least get it started. So then for scenario 3 is the education bill, and this is chief legislator, and this is because the president is publicly addressing the lawmakers to make a change, and is pressuring the lawmakers publicly, and it's advocating to the American citizens for the policy to be enacted. And then this applies through Article 1, Section 7, and this allows for the president to veto because it is saying it is him making decisions about the bill, and also allows, this is also important, to have influence over legislation, and he can or she can influence what the legislative process is going to look like. So for scenario 4, it's economic. And so the role of the president this follows is economic leader, and this is because responding to economic crises is the main job of the economic leader and something that the U.S. needs, and proposing solutions to economic problems, because you can't just respond, you also have to have a solution. You can't just be oh, this is really bad. You have to say, this is what we're going to do to fix it, and it'll help keep the country unified. And this is under Article 1, Section 8, and this allows Congress to levy the taxes and then to regulate the commerce. And this is basically saying that they can make changes to address the problems. So the scenario 5 is cybersecurity, and this is the role of chief executive. And the how and why is that signing an executive order enforces the laws, as well as enforcing federal agencies to use the current laws. So by being the chief executive, it allows for the president to change the laws that they want to change to help with the cybersecurity problem that this scenario was talking about. And this follows the president's inherited power, which is while being chief executive, allows them to direct the federal agencies and direct them to what their next steps are. So then the scenario that I came up with was a national emergency, and basically there was a cybersecurity attack on the power grid, and the role that this follows, what the president will have to do is address the problem and fix it. So it's the commander-in-chief because it's a military attack. And under Article 2, Section 2, the president is allowed to deploy military and federal resources to protect the nation. The next scenario is a veto situation. So there was a controversial bill, and the president vetoed it, even though many didn't agree. It was pretty split. So the role is chief legislator, because having influence over the legislative process is what the chief legislator is, that's what his or her job entails. And for Article 1, Section 7, it allows for the president to veto legislation. So that's pretty obvious about why this applies to this bill, or this scenario. Okay, and then scenario 3 is so the president nominated a Supreme Court justice after the past one retired. And this is the role of chief executive, because the role of chief executive includes the president appointing federal officials and then exercising executive authority, so saying like this is who's next. This is Article 2, Section 2, and it allows the president to appoint federal judges. And then here's my graph. So we went through, I don't know if I'm going over time. I kind of feel bad, sorry. But, so this is the presidential power. So this is veto, this one was given to us. And so I added veto legislation, which, is, for example, is just vetoing bills that are passed in Congress. And then the check on power for this is Congress can override 2/3 majority. And then for the next presidential power is negotiate treaties. And this is the signing of North American Free Trade Treaty, or agreement, which is NAFTA. Like, that's an example of this happening. But then the check to power is the Senate still has to ratify treaties with a 2/3 majority vote. The next one that I talked about was commander-in-chief, and an example of this would be such as like ordering military strikes against ISIS targets. And the checks on power for this is the War Powers Resolution, which is how Congress can limit powers in military situations, so it's not all on the president. And then the presidential power next is State of the Union. So every year they deliver a State of the Union address to Congress, but the Congress does not have to do everything the president says. Like, it's not like if the president says something that has to be done. The Congress still like has their way. And then next is enforce laws. And for example, this can direct the Department of Justice to prioritize different federal laws, such as like pressuring basically to like say this is what needs to come next. And then the courts can rule unconstitutional or illegal if they don't agree with the federal law. So, yeah. And then why did the founders intentionally limit presidential power? I essentially talked about in this slideshow, or this slide, that the founders wanted to make sure it wasn't similar to Britain, where it's just like one absolute power and all decisions run through one person, essentially, and they wanted to make sure that there was democracy. And then this is kind of brought the idea of checks and balances, which are really important for democracy and ensuring that one person didn't, like, if one person all of a sudden went crazy and decided to make really bad decisions, now with this system, everything was limited and everything was checked and went through the democratic process. So how are presidents actually elected? So there's a popular vote, and this is the number of this is the total number voted by citizens, and it's all counted equally. So that's just like everyone gets like one vote, one person. The Electoral College, this is where elections are won or lost, because it is the different number of electors per state, and typically it's the senators plus the number of representatives, and representatives are determined by population. So like California has 54 electors, while Wyoming has like no one living there, so it's only 3 electoral votes. But total in America United States, there is 533 electoral votes. And yes, they can produce different results, which is weird, but the total number of votes is essentially useless because it only matters how many electors that state has. For example, you can get many votes from Wyoming, but that's only 3 electoral votes, and it won't benefit you, so there's no difference between winning a state by 80% or winning by 51%, because in the end, all the electoral votes will be granted to the same winner, no matter the margin of success. That's irrelevant. So I went over the 2016 election because Donald Trump won. He won the Electoral College, but Clinton won the popular vote, and this happened because Trump won states that had more electoral votes, so he won states that had more weight in the final say. And then, I'm not going to read all this because I don't want to go too much farther over time, but essentially I just said that I think the Electoral College should be removed because I think it's more democratic for presidential voting to have, like, this is the vote, this is what people said. I don't think it should be like, oh, this state has more or less people, so this has more influence. I think that every vote should count equally, one vote, one weight, and nothing should be, like, it shouldn't depend on where you live, how much your vote matters. And then the biggest misconception people have about presidency, I'm just going to summarize this. I said that people misunderstand that the president has so much power. The president actually doesn't have, like, obviously there's a lot of power that goes into being a president, but there's so many checks and balances that it's not as much as people think. And then I said what surprised me is that there's different titles the president had to wear. Like, I knew that, but I didn't know, like, to what extent. There's so many different titles and different things that they have to do, but not only do they have to do it, but they get a different title every time. And then being a president, I thought, okay, I said it was easier than I thought, like, when I was, like, younger, because I thought it was just, like, okay, you should make every single decision all by yourself, and everything, like, is on your shoulders. But there's so many things to help you, and while I know being a president is hard socially, and it's not easy, it's just easier than I thought, because I thought everything was just on you, but really there's, the work is divided between different branches, and so many decisions have to go through so many people, so it's not just, like, oh, your decision, you say this, that's all on you.